Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks for hosting us. We'll be doing a fireside chat here with an incredible entrepreneur and CEO of an incredible company based in Europe here, a company called Vinted, and the CEO of it, obviously, Thomas Plantenga. Thomas, such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. It is fantastic to be here.
So just to give just a very quick summary on what we'll be discussing about today, and I understand people can also ask questions on Slido as we go through the fireside conversation. The topic today is the scaling of Vinted, unlocking tens of billions in global TAM, one market at a time. And Thomas and I thought this is an intriguing topic to talk about. Considering that, well, for one, oftentimes, entrepreneurs and investors, just keep arguing, what is the TAM? Is it big? Is it small? How to define it? And oftentimes it's just not obvious, neither how to define it nor really how to think about it. And I think Vinted is a case study in really finding that incredibly large market whilst going at it, market by market, which is double difficult, right? Like it's the first complication we already talked about, and then there is the hyper local element of it as well. Yeah. And I just honestly don't think there's a better person to talk about this topic really than Thomas. So Thomas, before we go into the details, and some of the topics that sort of, come out of this question, maybe you could share, with the audience here a little bit, just very quickly, what is Vinted? What do you do? Just a short history of the company and yourself as well.
Sure. So I didn't start Vinted. Vinted is started by Justus and Milda in Lithuania more than 10 or 11, more than 11 years ago already. And Milda moved from Kaunas to Vilnius, had a bunch of things, and thought it would be great if we could swap, share, sell clothing to each other. And then she ran into Justus, who was a brilliant teenage entrepreneur programmer who before built the accounting software of Lithuania, and they practically shared this idea with each other. Started building it, made it big in Lithuania just organically, and practically by building a tool that connects people to let people sell clothing to each other. So it's practically a classifieds for clothing. And then that grew over the years, run into some trouble in 2016 when they tried to monetize with the model like Poshmark has. And because they saw that was not a competitive business model compared to the new free classifieds such as Wallapop, Spoke, Facebook Marketplace that were then getting live as well. I met them then, and we had an incredible, interesting 5 weeks in which we rethinkered the business model and the approach and went live with that new approach. And we practically now have a transactional classifieds where people can ship and pay online for secondhand goods to buy them from somebody else. And we're able to connect not only within a country, but between countries. So from Brussels, you can buy a dress in Barcelona just with one click on a button, get it shipped at very attractive shipping prices all across Europe. And when reorganizing the company, we first became successful in France, then brought it to Belgium, Spain, the Netherlands, Germany, Poland, and now going to UK and other European markets.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And and just for context, as well, I'm a partner at the Lightspeed Venture Partners here, focusing on Europe and heading our efforts here. And, we were very pleased and delighted really to support Vinted and to lead the Series A financing round last year of $140 million. And, we at the time, Thomas, we at the time had the conviction, that this is a very, very large market. I'm curious, when you came in and when you thought of this opportunity, how did you think? What sort of customer behavior were you looking at? What were the signals that were telling you that this is a deep, deep, deep market to go after?
Yeah, so practically in the beginning, we didn't think like directly saw like, okay, this can become like this big as it is right now. But when we were doing the math, we saw like, okay, we have this business model with high cost, and if we test, for example, with low cost, how does it impact the growth dynamics? And we saw that it really altered the growth dynamics. And then we started to think about, okay, if you build a model that really makes it economically efficient to make all types of clothing tradable, not only the high-end ones, then the volumes go up. And actually, not only the volumes go up, but also the amount of people that can effectively use it becomes much wider. And then we practically made a case like, okay, that could mean that actually each of the big European countries could have $1 billion value. And that seemed a bit like, okay, even when I was doing those calculations, on the current projections and with the current efficiencies, this seems massive. But if I look at the general math of the amount of people that are active in this market and the engagement metrics that we have right now, it's possible. So then when we saw that, we thought like, okay, then we can just invest aggressively. And after the first aggressive push, we really saw like, okay, from an Excel model based on some A/B tests that with some small bumps to, let's say, a real first big wave. Actually, this is real. So we got our first real validation. And then that was the moment that we became more confident to invest more. But then to be really, really honest, the size where France is right now, you never know if it's going to get there. And still now growing at such a high pace, it's very hard to say like where it's really going to get, because it's already at a point that you thought like, okay, I never thought that we would get where we are right now. So there is always a certain uncertainty. But what makes me confident is, let's say, industry type of benchmarks and then seeing actually how small you are. So for example, in what I think is public now is that like in 2019, we had 1.3 billion of GMV. And that sounds like, okay, that's pretty big. But then you look at the new sales market in Europe, which is roughly 120 billion. And then actually you realize like, okay, we're roughly 1% in Europe. And actually it's very logical that multiple percentage points, or actually maybe 20, 30% of all the sales in fashion could be secondhand in the future. And then all of a sudden it starts to hit you like, okay, actually this is possible and we could go to such kind of volumes. But I think you never know for sure. You always have an estimation, like a benchmark of a total industry. And then you try on your current tests of growth and current growth waves, try to validate for yourself whether it's still realistic that you're going to get there. What we saw is that consistently, actually, due to the growth of the platform, the efficiency became better, and thereby consistently it became more logical, actually, that our initial predictions could be true.
Right. Is part of the oversight there, if you will, Thomas, right? Like 10 years ago, people didn't realize, right? Like that this is such a deep market. Yeah. Is part of it the fact that there is that effectively Vinted changes the customer behavior? Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like people that come to you, like were they selling clothes before? Like, if like what was that item even in the market? Because the beauty of it is that the circular economy that you're very much part of, obviously, right, with Vinted, is that, let's say, a dress that's on a Vinted marketplace, it could change hands 10 times and create 10 times the value compared to the one time, but even not that one time, maybe it was in the market to start with. So like there's that interesting dynamic, right? A little bit, I think.
Absolutely, and those things you don't realize in the beginning, right? Those elements that you now mentioned. And I think if you think about like one of the things that really shook me is then when we started growing, we didn't start growing at the expense of somebody else. So it was not like, okay, we're now in fashion. After the first year, we were like, I don't know, 4 times bigger than Le Bon Coin in fashion. Okay, hey, but Le Bon Coin is not really going down. Wait a second, we're completely creating a new market. Okay, are we then taking these clothings away from the shops, the offline shops? No, hey, this market also seems to be growing. So we realized, okay, we're really creating something new. And then we looked like, okay, how many of the people that are trading on Vinted were trading secondhand fashion before? And 75% had never done that, nor bought nor sold secondhand clothing. So we completely created a new market out of something that people were absolutely not doing it. And when you do that, then actually, when you realize that that's happening, and you're not growing at somebody else's expense, then it means probably that market that's there for you is massively, because most of the people never interacted with secondhand clothing. And we were actually taking that market, which was the big part of the market. So that was one of those points that I thought like, wow, okay, this is really happening. And then I realized like how kind of high frequency game this is, and that you have like clothes who circle from people to people, and that the money goes circularly. So they sell something and they buy something with it. So it's kind of one big flywheel that is, helping each other to become more and more efficient. All those things, when you make your first Excel and the first cohort changes and the first cost of acquisition changes, you try to say like, okay, and there are network effects in this business, so it will become more efficient. You build those models, and but you don't think about all these effects that are happening, that they would, that really help you to push to this growth. So we never thought it would be this big. We hoped it, but then when you see it play out, it's quite interesting. And therefore, it's very important to, when you see something going well, to invest a lot of time to see if you consistently can make that better. To really like every time you find friction in your process and you create efficiency, you actually grow your TAM. So this consistently focus on making your product better, making it actually almost TAM maximization in that sense.
Totally.
And you cannot model that in the beginning and think about that and have all that in your mind. It's like an iterative process along the way of years of iteration to get to a bigger TAM.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a question on Slido there, like, how do you think about obtainable market? But in that sense, like, it's all obtainable because you're creating it, and that oftentimes is the case actually with network effect driven businesses, which like you just created something out of nothing effectively.
Yeah, and this is actually the thing that we're constantly looking at. So we're thinking like, hey, why are strollers not selling? Wait a sec, that shipping is not proper. Hey, what if we connect this shipping to it, and then let's see what happens. And then boom, sell-through rate goes 5x, and all of a sudden you obtain the stroller second-hand market. So it's like constantly thinking about, okay, what is the total market? Which pockets do we like fully have? What are the pockets that we don't have? And how can we make sure that we make that work? Because usually you don't get those parts of the market because you're just not doing something right. And if you start to build something that enables it, then poof, it goes.
Very interesting. Thomas, could you juxtapose what you've just described with the fact that, let's say, 5 years ago, I think, the company was focused on quite a lot of markets at the same time, finding it difficult to find the dynamics that you've described in any single one. And then it was really like through iterations that, like it became quite focused, market by market. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Like how not to stretch oneself thin? And, a lot of the entrepreneurs, here, who are listening, they're probably also thinking one market versus many markets, one product versus many products. What's the beauty and focus there? And what's then the opposite, right? Like what's the risk of doing the opposite maybe a little bit?
So I think the biggest risk is your ego. And so everybody wants to dominate the world, right? Build a global brand, and VCs are definitely catalyzing that thought in you. And it's like, you're an amazing job, Thomas. Let's take the world. Let's go this and do that, and that feels great. And then you think, let's color that map and go everywhere. And I've been part of many stories where that also didn't work and seemed to be very, very difficult. And for example, I've been very close to the Wallapop story, where they wanted to go everywhere, and in the end, just in Spain, they're now building a business, and there are many examples, and Wallapop is one of the examples. OLX is one of those examples where I actually myself was part of this huge expansion, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and then only a few of those actually are really working. And I saw how difficult that was, learned a ton of it, but actually realized with Vinted, that you think you have a product that is working, you think you have a product market fit, but there are literally a million iterations that you can make to make that product actually work better. And if you take time to really do that, every time you then go to another market, you'll learn a ton of other things that you can do better due to that market just being slightly different. And then all the learnings from that other market you take into that new market. So what we see is that every time we go into a new market, really take a time to learn that market, understand it, and then fix it, and then only then move on to the next one. And thereby every new market expansion becomes more efficient and becomes better. And honestly, you consistently being pulled by your own ego, by your ambition and your investors to go faster. But it's critical to really work on the fundamental stuff in each market. And don't just go away from markets and saying like, well, it's culturally different, therefore it doesn't work, so let's go somewhere else. Because it will that some markets work less well than other markets. But blaming it on culture is just saying like, we're so good, it's just these terrible people in this market that don't want this. No, man, your product is not working for them. And you need to fix it and figure out what's not working for them. And then you become smarter. And any other country that's similar to this country will then open up faster. So I think it's of essence to not blame culture and go too fast, but to take the time to really get in-depth knowledge on why maybe certain markets are working not as well as other markets, find those pain points, fix it, and then move on stronger. And next to that, any market is, even if you're creating a new market, a competitive battle. And you have limited resources. And it sounds also simple, like don't spread yourself too thin, but when you are in many markets, you will have to make choices. When you zero down on one or two, you can give it not only all your attention, but you can also give it all the power of all the money you have in your bank account. And that in certain battles is just essential. It is sometimes essential to take a market faster and overpay for that to ensure that you're the winner and you can create those network effects in that market, because those things are real and you need to have the balance sheet to do that. And there are two ways: you raise money or you focus your balance sheet.
Isn't it counterintuitive, right? Like what you've described, basically, and the topic is unlocking tens of billions in global TAM. Isn't it counterintuitive? It feels like going after large markets and many markets is the way to unlock the TAM. And what you're saying is one market at a time, basically, right?
Yeah. And let me be very honest about this. We learned the hard way, right? So what we always did is we take some harder bets and smaller, easier bets. And in the beginning, France was working. When we said, well, let's do small television test US, small television test UK, small television test Belgium, because Belgium, with all respect for Belgium, I'm from a small country myself, the Netherlands, but Belgium kind of a province of France in terms of how equal it is in many ways. Another part is very equal to the Netherlands, but so we said, okay, that's the easy bet because most probably it works there and everything like that. And then obviously we saw the different economics and we saw Belgium was working very much more better. Then you can drown much more money into bigger markets where you see that the initial economics are worse, or you say to yourself, let's pace ourselves. Let's push Belgium further, learn from Belgium, learn on that international field on the easiest market first, and then go further. And then we took Spain. And with all the learnings from Spain, we could go so much faster into Spain. And then when we learned a lot of stuff in Spain, we actually could accelerate ourselves in the Netherlands. And now we have this tremendous strong block of all these countries together that really strengthen each other. And we will never know whether it would have been better if I would have doubled down in the US or in the UK and by that time learned in those markets. I don't know, but there is a real advantage on working on the markets and on stuff that works for you, but very quickly those markets mature and very quickly those markets will give you very good cash flow and very good economics and thereby building a very strong moat. A collection of smaller parts can become one of the biggest parts in Europe. And that's actually what we created now. If you look at Spain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and the UK together, well, that's a chunk that's very hard to get around.
Yep, definitely agree with that. Thomas, would you talk a little bit maybe about some of the, so that was sort of, the phrase where the company sort of, you found out like, the rhythm, and then, so how about some of the more recent new market wins? Have they been sort of, have you found the exact same playbook worked, or has it been different? Like, which have been some of the markets that you've been, excited to really unlock a lot of TAM in? Behavioral, like, is it all the same? You just like come into a new country, it's like the same playbook, or do you keep like, tweaking and tuning? Yeah.
Every market has the same fundamentals, but to reach those fundamental, and when I say fundamentals, can have, let's say, similar growth dynamics. But to reach that, you need to fix certain tactical elements in each part of your operations, whether it's marketing and the way you buy media, the way you create your marketing creatives, the way you set up your shipping solutions, your payment solutions, your search, your ordering of content. Every market is slightly different, yet you're working to the same fundamentals. The security should reach the lowest possible scams and spams. Your shipping and payments should have the lowest cost and the fastest delivery. Your marketing should have the lowest CAC. And when you go into a market, sometimes you go into a market and on 6 of those elements, like everything is not getting there. And then the only thing you can do is like take each of these elements and figuring out what's wrong and how to fix that. And in some markets you go in and then 4 out of 5 are already on green, and you know that's only one thing to fix. And thereby going to markets that are very similar, like France to Belgium, that makes it easy because Belgium was 80% the same. Then going to Spain was 70% the same. We need to fix a couple of things. So if you look on television, different kind of ways of buying those formats, different ways of getting discounts, and all of these ways you need to learn. And therefore, when you go into a market, you can know for sure that your first attempt is not going to work. And only if you're kind of like out of your mind, you don't realize that. So you really need to set yourself up to fail, let's say, probably on half of all the things that you're doing in a market. Understand that that's going to happen. Take the time to fix those things, and along the way, then ramp up your investments to learn how to do that. So I really don't believe in the old theory where you just have one product that works for all and then just push with investments to let the network effect solve your problems, because I think that that's just a very expensive way of growing your marketplace, and it just will not unlock the same type of TAM. Because yes, you can fix it with network effects who fix certain elements, but that will then dramatically impact the amount of TAM that you can unlock, because that inefficiency will cap your total market you can unlock.
Makes sense. And Thomas, the team today is primarily in Vilnius and in Berlin, I understand, right? You're actively hiring today, right? So let's put the message out there, like that's important.
Absolutely.
Now, folks that join at this stage of the journey, right? Like say you're joining in Berlin, how much are they still involved in strategic considerations like that? Like which market, how big is the TAM, like what sequences, should we, like, is it still some of that, like considering how large and, disparate Europe is, or is it more just executing on some of the, well-working motions, or is it a bit of both as well? Like what sort of stage are you at right now, I would say?
So it's actually a very good question. It makes me makes me actually realize a certain element that we're doing right now and how we are organizing it. And I think it's kind of nice. So what we're doing is that we're getting at a scale of 500 people, where actually the top management team is mostly coordinating to make sure that the right people are working on the right problems. Which means that on the director level, where it's the level that we're hiring a lot of people and people within Vinted are growing into that, that's actually where most of the strategy work is happening. And we're really at this point in time shaping the strategy of the company in terms of what is the geo expansion, how do we get more depth in the current fashion categories or more width within fashion categories, how do we optimize certain transactional flows. And what we see is that on this director level, we're hiring now very bright people and people within Vinted are growing up who are building practically their own little companies and writing the strategies for that. So, the strategy of payment, the strategy of shipping, the strategy of trust and safety, the geo expansion strategy, the merger strategies, the acquisition strategies, all those things are actually built by the directors that are now within Vinted. So it's and it's beautiful. So we, as a top management team, we realized, I think 4 months ago, we realized that we should not be anymore the guys who do that. And we realized, okay, you know what? We should be the guys who only think about what the high-level objectives are. Like, okay, expand into as much market as possible, give the most compelling shipping proposition in Europe, And then giving those objectives to directors who are like, young, ambitious people underneath you who have worked by 1 or 2 other tech companies, then them letting them actually build those strategies. To our big surprise, we saw as a top management team that they're way better at it and that they come with fantastic ideas and can do that with much more focus and dedication than we do, and thereby the results are better. So it's now really of the top management's job to let other people build in those domains, those strategies, and enable to find the future of the fashion industry, and to see in what way we could participate in that.
Yeah, that's exciting. And there are two related questions on Slido I can see. One is, how do you decide which category to introduce next? So, women's clothing, children's, books, and the other one is, how far do you believe you can stretch into new categories, electronics, furniture, cars? So just maybe a high level, how do you decide and how far do you think, the model can extend? If it needs to, maybe it doesn't need to extend.
Yeah, so I think if we look away from Vinted, I think every vertical will be disrupted and changed by a player who makes it works much better than what the general classifieds are doing right now. And I think in electronics, you have a fantastic example with Back Market. We're doing in fashion well, and there are many different examples. And within Vinted, we had first only pure fashion, kids and female. Then we said, okay, it's very logical. We have men as well. And because of kids, also very logical, you have kids' toys. And then a lot of girls were asking, I have a lot of these little lifestyle things in my room. I would love to sell them as well. Is that possible? And we thought, you know what, we can add home and deco a bit, but let's not go too wide because we want to stay kind of a lifestyle fashion platform. So what we see now is that, we see such an enormous market in this fashion that we're really going to focus on that. And it's just because we see there's so many things we can do so much better to make all types of fashion goods being traded easier and faster. Thus, what we do there to make the decision is just looking at, okay, how much is this potential? How much work do we see there? And what kind of risk do we see there? If you compare those trade-offs within fashion to, let's say, okay, let's go into an electronics category, that risk element and your know-how element just rockets away to make it very uncompelling to start doing that right now. And therefore, we first really want to focus on fashion to ensure that we really get most out of that and take all our learnings out of that, and then consider if we want to do anything else except fashion. But if you think about it, we just got this model kind of working in a couple markets in Europe, and we want to do this globally. So we're not gonna, burn ourselves on trying to sell computers right now and cars, while we have a tremendous job ahead of us on which we have barely enough people to do the stuff that we're doing right now.
Yeah, so for that you need to obviously hire some phenomenal folks, in Berlin and in Vilnius, as we talked about. So, and obviously, instead of extending into new, you're just getting deeper into the existing. I know we're almost running out of time here, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about the some of the recent sort of movements on the M&A side. So you've acquired a company, right, which wasn't even the first acquisition. Yeah. Why now? How does that add to your understanding of, how you're tapping into the TAM here as well? Just really for a minute quickly, on that.
Yeah, we just look at each market and we look okay, how can we develop this as efficient, as fast as possible? And in Spain, we did an acquisition of a user base. And in the Netherlands, we actually bought a complete company, United Wardrobe, because also that team would be very, very interesting for us to work with. So actually that team can help us to accelerate our expansion, and the user base that they had in the Netherlands was actually very useful to accelerate our growth in the Netherlands. If we look at that acquisition, it's kind of small compared to the whole totals we're talking about, but the team had, fantastic values that are so aligned with us, and they're building a great product that we thought, would be a shame to fight each other. Let's just team up. And if we look at future growth, organic growth will be our biggest driver, yet we really believe that secondhand can be first choice worldwide, and we will take any type of method to make that go faster and better. If that's acquisition, fundraising, or whatever it is, we'll use those methods to accelerate our journey in any way possible. So it's not excluded out of any future plans.
Super. Thomas, any parting words? I think we're at time, but
I
and this
enjoyed
has been
it.
super interesting. But anything else to add what we talked
No,
about?
no, good. It was great catching up. Felt a bit like I had to pitch again to you. Like we're still doing well and we're making great plans.
I was going to the Slido questions. That's all I was doing. No, but this was great, Thomas. Yeah, really appreciate you you making time, and thanks everyone for active participation.